During World War II, probably one of the worst places on the planet was a concentration camp called Auschwitz. Millions of people were executed there. Horrible things happened there. It was a concentration camp. If a prisoner escaped, the policy there was they would have a drawing as soon as they discovered that someone had escaped. And they would draw 10 numbers out of a pot, and whoever's number was drawn, they would lock up in a cell and starve them to death. They would go to that cell and they would die of starvation. Well, somebody escaped. 10 prisoners were, their names were gone. And as those names were drawn, they came to the 10th man. And when they called out his number, he cried out loud, "What will happen to my wife and my children?" This man was a Polish professional soldier, and he just came undone. He was heartbroken about his family, that he was going to die now in Auschwitz. And he was up to the front. Everybody, hundreds of these prisoners were standing in formation exactly where they were supposed to be. They were never allowed to speak. If they got out of formation, they might be shot, or the dogs would attack them, or they would be beaten. And all of a sudden, somebody in the crowd starts moving toward the front, toward the commandant. He's coming through the crowd. He's excusing himself as he pushes people apart to walk through them. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. Very calm, gets to the front. There's a guard right there with a rifle pointed at him. He said, "I need to speak to the commandant, please." And the commandant said, "Let him come through." And he said, "Who are you?" He could have been shot and killed for that. The dogs were high alert. They knew, the dogs could sense when somebody's going to be the next dinner for them. So they were waiting. This man walks up. He says, "Who are you?" He says, "Well, my name is Maximilian Kolbe, and I'm a Catholic priest of the Franciscan order. And I have a request for you, Commandant." He took his hat off, put it over his heart, bowed in respect, and said, "Would you please let me die in this man's place? Would you let him live and take my life?" And then he appealed to his German mentality. He is young and strong and he can do some good work for you. I'm older and weaker. Let him live. Put me to death. And the commandant said, "Okay." So they took him away to that cell where the people were put in to starve to death. He was the last one alive. They wanted that room for something else. An eyewitness who was there said he was always sharing food before was put in the starvation chamber. He was sharing food with other prisoners. He was praying with other prisoners. He was encouraging them. Everybody knew him and loved him. And he would stand in the middle of that cell waiting for somebody to come. If he wasn't standing, he'd be kneeling. And they walked in, they had the syringe of acid that they were going to inject him with that would go straight to his heart and kill him immediately. And he saw what was coming, and he calmly held out his left arm for they to inject him, and he died. How does somebody do something like that? What kind of faith did he have? He was willing to lay down his life for somebody he really didn't even know. He had to know he was going to be fine, that God would save him. So many times we think Jesus just saves us from hell. Jesus saves us from hell. He saves us from ourselves. He saves us from fear. He saves us from anything we need to be saved from. This is probably going to be the strangest Easter message you've ever heard. I thought I had it lined out. Have you ever thought you had it lined out? God says, I don't think so. Well, yesterday, Wednesdays are my study day because I've got a Bible study at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. I was trying to prepare. By 1:30, I had no idea where I was going. Now, 2 weeks ago, I thought, okay, God's given it to me. I got the plan for the next couple of weeks. Last week, we talked about the last couple of weeks in Jesus' life, what he found to be most important, the things that he did, the things that he put first, knowing his life was about to end. This week, I thought, I'd just go through Max Lucado's book, 6 hours one Friday, be a great message, and we're done. Just didn't feel right. And I said, well, God, what do you want me to say to these people? And could you please tell me now so I can start putting it together? He said, yeah, this is weird. He said, talk to them about the crucifixion from the perspective of a psychologist and an attraction coach. And I thought, really? He said, yeah, that's the perspective you see it from. Share it with these people. It will help them. And he said, talk to them about the laws of God, the language of God, and the love of God surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus. So here we go. We're going to be looking at these things in Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be in Matthew. We're going to take a look at Luke. We're going to look at John. You got to look at all four Gospels to really understand what the crucifixion was about, because you've got these four people that report from a different perspective. So in chapter 26, verse 30, it said, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, and by the way, mark that, when they had sung a hymn, we're going to come full circle back to Jesus singing today. And when they'd sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. As it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. You know, Peter, he's usually got his foot in his mouth. I will never. Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same. Verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and watch with me. He is so distraught. What we're going to look at today is when Jesus, who suffered more than any other human being in his death. You think about this. Jesus had all of the sin of the world, past, present, and future, and all the punishment that was due that sin dumped on him. He knew what was coming. He experienced betrayal. He experienced injustice. He experienced torture physically, psychologically, spiritually, all of it. It was absolutely horrible. And under the greatest pressure a human could be under, we're going to see how he worked with the laws that he had created. Now, if we went to Colossians, we'll see that all things were created for him and by him, and in him all things hold together. As you sit in this beautiful sanctuary right now, you're under the jurisdiction of the laws of the city of Dallas, the county of Dallas, the state of Texas, and the United States of America. Also, as you sit there in your human bodies, you're under physical, biological law, psychological law, and spiritual law. God created all of the laws. He created the law of gravity. He created all kinds of laws to make everything work. If we understand those laws and we cooperate with those laws greatly benefit us. If we don't understand them and abide by them, we will get hurt. How many times have you seen parents saying to their small children, the small children are so excited about something, they got to run. You know how little kids are, they got to run. Don't run. Don't run. Slow down. Don't run. And then their upper body goes faster than their lower body, and their elbows hit the pavement and their knees hit the pavement. They come up with blood on their elbows and their knees, and they're crying and they're pain. They didn't understand the law of gravity and friction. It'll rip the skin right off of your bones real fast. When we understand these laws that God created and abide by them, life gets easier. And we're watching Jesus right here. Now, this is a message from the perspective of a psychologist. Jesus understood mental, emotional, psychological laws. So he is in a state of very deep emotion. If we flipped over to Luke, it said he was sweating drops of blood. Have you ever been under so much pressure you start to sweat? I have been there many times before. When I started speaking, I was so terrified I would sweat profusely. I couldn't wear my glasses because if I had my glasses on and I looked down at my Bible, sweat would drop on my glasses, blur my vision. I couldn't read. So I was terrified and my body would sweat. I've never been to the point where I've sweated drops of blood, but other people have been. That's where Jesus was, the extreme emotion. Sometimes when parents have seen their children just shredded by wild animals or get caught up in machinery and dismembered and killed, it's so much stress, their eyes will turn blood red. All those little capillaries burst because of the internal pressure. That's what Jesus is experiencing. He is experiencing, I think, the greatest, deepest, hardest emotion any human body had ever been through. And he's sweating drops of blood. Let me tell you everything I know about psychology in one sentence. It's my belief that the only time in the normal course of life, short of a head injury or a chemical overdose, the only time people ever make lasting, significant change is when they make a new decision in a state of deep or heightened emotion. So here's Jesus. He knows he is in a state of heightened emotion. He's about to make a really, really good decision. And I can tell the way some of you are looking back, you're thinking, I don't know about this. I always heard you should never make a decision in a state of heightened emotion. Let me specify and clarify this. Everybody has the law of the seesaw in their life. You understand how the seesaw works. On one end, you have clarity of thought. On the other end, you have heightened emotion. If heightened emotion goes up, clarity of thought drops. If clarity of thought comes up, emotion drops. So here's the key. When your clarity of thought is high, that's when you should decide what your decisions are going to be. And then when the emotion comes, that's when you can anchor it. You can make that decision in a state of deep or heightened emotion. It will permeate your subconscious mind and it will stick. Jesus understood this. He knew from years before he was going to the cross. He knew as he was in the final hours of his life. He knew it was going to be rough. He'd been preparing and he had decided what his decision was going to be before he got to this place. He's very emotional, very, very emotional. And going a little bit, this is verse 39, and going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. In this state of heightened emotion, he says, Not my will, but your will. Nail. Now, I bet you everybody in this room knows there's something in your life that you need to change. If you think about it, you'll probably realize you have all made some self-destructive decisions along the way. A lot of times things happen, we make decisions. I'm just a failure. I can't ever succeed. I have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I need people's approval. I'd rather be dead. There's some kinds of decisions that all of us need to change. And you get to think right now, when you're not in a state of deep emotion, where do I need to say, God, not my will, but yours be done? Think about it. Decide what you need to decide. And then when the emotions come, you can load up those good decisions, and they're probably going to stick until you change them in a state of deep or heightened emotion. Jesus was prepared. He made this decision. I'm going to do exactly what God wants me to do, and he went to the cross. However, Peter made a different decision because Jesus said, hey, you are going to betray me. You are going to abandon me. You are going to deny me. You're going to do it 3 times before the rooster crows. And he said, oh, no, won't happen, won't happen, won't happen. But when he saw what they were doing to Jesus, and he realized if he wasn't careful, he might get crucified too, the fear, the terror, the emotion, he suddenly decided to totally, completely deny that he had ever had anything to do with Jesus whatsoever. That was a new decision he made in that state of deeper heightened emotion. Now, you know the rest of the story. Later on, when Jesus forgave him for what he'd done, he made another new decision that this is the Christ, this is the Savior, and I really will give my life for him. And he lived the rest of his life serving God, and finally was martyred. He did die for the sake of Christ eventually. It took him a few decisions to get there. Jesus models psychological understanding. He took advantage of the bad situation. For the rest of my life, when the emotions are running high, I do 2 things. I do theophostic ministry, where I pray that simple prayer, dear God, I will follow these feelings wherever they take me. Will you come and do and say whatever you want to do and say? I'll have an experience with God as I'm coming up. I'll tell God what my own personal decisions for who I want to be is, and I reload it. Used to, the 2 things I hated in life more than anything were vomiting and crying. I just didn't want to do either one of those. Would fight it tooth and toenail, anything to keep from vomiting or crying. And I've gotten to that place where I realize heightened emotion, my worst feelings, can become some of my best friends, because I will use that emotional power to reprogram myself to do what God wants me to do. And I get to load up whatever kind of programs I choose. So Jesus models his understanding of psychological law. And then we come to the next section of this, verse 47. And while still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. I believe Jesus was in total, complete control of this whole thing. I want to prove that to you from John, the 10th chapter. Then we're going to come back here to Matthew. Jesus was not murdered. Jesus laid down his life. He came to die. He accomplished that on the cross. He came to be the absolute final blood sacrifice, and he succeeded. So in John chapter 10, verse 14, it says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. As the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. I love quantum physics. Quantum physics has helped me with my faith probably more than 3 years of Sunday school, just because it makes sense. I'm the bad child of God. You know, you guys are the good children of God. God just says, do this and do this. And you're just like, yes, Father, I'll do it. I'm like, well, why? Well, how does it work? Well, what's in it for me? And I like to know how things work. And when I started studying about the law of attraction, I did a 300-page dissertation on it. So I dug pretty deep. And I watch and I see Jesus, who created the law of attraction, understands how it works. You look at the Bible, everything God tells us to do is probably going to keep us in high frequency, high vibration. The law of attraction basically says like frequency attracts like frequency. So Jesus understands that. He attracted whatever he needed whenever he needed. The disciples came and said, Lord, it's time to pay the taxes. What are we going to do? We don't have the money. He said, go fishing. Catch a fish, open its mouth. The first fish you check, you'll find the coin in its mouth, a gold coin. Pay our taxes with that. He attracted that. That's pretty cool. Some little boy at a crowd of thousands of people was only one that seemed to have any food there. He took it, he blessed it, he multiplied it. Everybody ate till they were till they were full, and there were many baskets left over after it was done. He knew how to attract things. Jesus is ready to die. He knows the time is right. The chief priest and the elders despised him. They hated him. He exposed them. He was a threat to their religion, their beliefs, their security, their jobs, their income. They wanted him dead, and they were planning to kill him. So what is he doing? He goes in that garden. He takes his own body into this very, very low vibration. He was sorrowful. He was sad. He was distressed. He was troubled. He goes to that low vibration. What does he attract? An angry crowd armed with swords and clubs to take him away and help him do what he came to do. He was in total control. Again, he understood laws of psychology. He understood the law of attraction. Now we're going to take a look at some of his language. We've seen some of the laws. We're going to come back to some more, but look at his language. He's taken to court with these chief priests and elders. That's a religious court. It was a kangaroo court. It was rigged. He did not get a fair trial. And then they take him to Herod, where he's tried again. And they really don't find anything wrong with him there. And finally, they take him to Pilate. Pilate said, I don't see anything wrong with this guy. But they were about to have a riot, so Pilate gave in. He didn't get a fair trial. 3 times he didn't get a fair trial. But watch how he handles this. In chapter 26, verse 63, it said, but Jesus remained silent. Then later in chapter 27, verse 14, he's before Pilate. It said, but he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Oftentimes, Jesus would use very few words. It's important to know when to speak and when not to speak. I have a mentor, 48 years, and he was the first time I ever heard somebody say this when he said, do you just run into people sometimes that just keep talking until they think of something to say? Have you run into people? Some people use too many words, way too many words. I want to read to you one scripture. It comes from Proverbs. I'm going to read it to you from 3 different translations. It's so important. The New King James Version states Proverbs 10:19 this way. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. In the English Standard Version, it says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. And now the Amplified Version is not going to get louder, but it's going to get bigger. When there are many words, transgression and offense are unavoidable. But he who controls his lips and keeps thoughtful silence is wise. I learned when to shut up when I was at Baylor. I was in something that was called Student Foundation, and we did kinds of things for the campus. One of the things we did was we raised money for student scholarships. And one night they were training us. They let us on the inside of how the whole university worked. Tom Z. Parrish was the guy who was in charge of development for Baylor University. And he came to our Student Foundation meeting and he trained us. He said, for those of you who are in financial affairs, who are going to be out there asking people for a lot of money for scholarships, there's a time to speak and there's a time to shut up. Tom had on a plaid jacket. He just looked like a college professor, which he was before he became director of development, had on a bow tie. He told us about how Baylor used their money 24/7, how they were constantly running the flow, investing, reinvesting, trying to be good stewards of it. He said, when you go talk to these people, these are very successful business people that you're going to be talking to. So go in, be nice to them, look around, pay attention. If they've got animal heads with horns on the wall and guns on the wall, ask them if they like to hunt. If they've got a trophy of somebody swinging a golf club, ask them where they like to play golf. Talk about them. Don't talk about yourself. Talk about them first. And then when you sense that they're ready to get down to business, tell them why you've come today, to talk to you about our Student Foundation. Well, we come to the fourth thing that we do, which was we raise money for student scholarships. So we tell these people, we have something we call our advisory board. And our advisory board members are people who have given us $500 or more for student scholarships. I bet you've been in the home of some of your friends who graduate from Baylor, and you see this cool little trophy. It's on a mahogany piece of board that's about 6 by 8 inches. It's got their name on a brass plate, and there's a little bronze bicycle on top of it, which is commemorative of our 50-mile indoor bicycle race, where we raise lots of money by having that. It's a citywide event. Now, I've already told these people that an advisory board member is somebody who's given $500 or more. And so once I've told them what we do, I will look at them and say, Mr., Mrs. So-and-so, we've come here today to ask you if you'd like to be part of our advisory board. Would you be willing to do that? Stop right there. Tom Z. Parrish said, once you've asked that question, would you be willing to be part of our advisory board? The next person to talk loses. He said, say what you have to say and stop. This morning after a men's Bible study, I was talking to one guy who used to sell cars for Sewell. He said, they trained us. Don't be afraid of silence. Present things, go in, show them the numbers, go over the numbers, and shut up. Don't talk. Don't mess it up, because the next person to speak loses. Well, that was tested. Now, keep in mind, these businessmen, we weren't the first people from Student Foundation to ever show up. I was here. They'd send us out 2 by 2. There were 2 Baylor students. We were in downtown Dallas. We go up to the top of one of those huge buildings downtown Dallas into this very ritzy office, really impressive, fabulous view of the city of Dallas. We walk in. The secretary, the administrative assistant takes us in, gets us something to drink, takes us in, introduces us to Mr. So-and-so. He says, sit down. And he's shuffling papers and putting stuff in drawers. And finally opens his top drawer, pulls out a .45 automatic pistol, lays it on the table, and says, what would y'all like to talk about today? Well, that kind of set us back, threw us for a little bit of a loop. So we went through our whole deal. We got to the end and we said, and Mr. So-and-so, we've come here today to ask you if you would be willing to be on our advisory board. And we shut up. And he looked at us. And he looked at us. And he looked at us for about 2 or 3 minutes. It felt like eternity. And we're thinking, we don't know what's going to happen. The gun's on the table. He's not talking. We can't talk. I mean, they trained us well. We didn't say a word. Finally, I guess he decided we weren't going to break in the silence. And he said, you guys did a good job. I'm going to give each one of you a check for $500 and send us on our way. But that was a lesson in learning to be silent. Learn when not to talk. Jesus was a master of that. And that leads us back to another law. He understood the law of resistance. He created all these laws. The law of resistance says what you resist persists. You cannot resist something unless you give it your attention. And whatever you give your attention to, you're giving your energy to. And whatever you give your energy to will expand. Now, think about your own life. You know, God says things like fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, fixing our eyes on him, always looking at him. But Satan says, but look at the economy, look at inflation, look at traffic, look at how somebody lied to you, look at how somebody lied about you, look at how this happened. And he's constantly trying to distract us from looking at God and get us to get our minds off of God onto problems. And then we start to resist those problems. Now, if you got a problem here and you give it your attention, you're giving your energy, that means it's going to get bigger and stronger when you give it your energy. And you're going to get smaller and weaker. And it's going to get bigger and stronger. You get smaller and weaker. It gets bigger and stronger. Before you know it, it's huge. You're small. You're exhausted. You have no energy left, and it will crush you. When you give your attention to God, you're giving him your energy, but he gives it back to you. It's so important to learn the law of resistance. Jesus did not resist death. It was an agonizing death, but he didn't resist it, and he was gone in 6 hours. Crucifixion was an art and a science that the Romans had been developing for decades, and they planned it to last as long as it possibly could. They knew how to nail people to the cross without hitting arteries, so they didn't want them to bleed out 2 or 3 hours. They knew how to hang them on a cross so they could live for 6 or 7 or 8 more days. Sometimes they'd even give them a little water to drink on the cross so they would stay alive a little bit longer. Jesus was gone in 6 hours. This was a supernatural event. I'm a supernatural junkie. I don't know if y'all figured that out. I love the miraculous. I love the supernatural. One time I went upstairs to my bedroom, and there I had an antique Chevrolet on top, a big old-fashioned box TV. Remember when TVs were boxy? I mean, they weren't flat screens. They were big, heavy boxes. I had that up there, but I had a tape player. Back in the days when we had VHS tapes, and you put this great big chunky video and you could watch movies. All I ever watched, I didn't watch television. I didn't have cable. I didn't have antenna. I didn't watch television. I'd either watch movies or training videos. I was about to get on my Nordic track, ski for 30 minutes, and watch this guy teach me how to trade stocks, Wade Cook. And I was ready to watch this video. I put it in, I turn it on, I get on, I start spinning. The TV's still warming up. It finally warms up, and the training video doesn't come on. The only way you could watch those training videos if it was on the VHF channels and it had a channel 2 or 3. It stayed there. Nobody was messing with my TV. I live alone. I had watched it 2-3 days earlier. I hadn't changed anything, but somehow it changed from VHF to UHF. When it does come on, there's TD Jakes, the talking head from about here up. TD Jakes is talking about, and I get off, I'm walking toward the television to change it, and he literally says, Jesus did not resist death. And that's how he was gone in just 6 hours, from a process that would normally take somewhere around 6 or more days. Why? He didn't resist it. He went with it. We see him. He didn't resist the chief priest and the elders. He didn't resist Herod. He didn't resist Pilate. He didn't resist. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He kept his eyes on God. He said, not my will, your will be done. So he was not going to resist the inevitable, and it ended faster. When we resist things, we usually prolong our pain. As a child, I hated injections. As an adult, I hate injections, but I'm more sophisticated now. So as a child, I would kick and scream. Sometimes it would take 6 adults to hold me still to stick a needle in my arm. I would tighten up. I'd lock down. I have broken needles. I have bent needles. I just hated those needles. I would resist. As a teenager, I went to the good doctor one day, family doctor. His nurse was one of the a family friend for a long time. And I was a teenager now, so I need to be cool, especially in front of women. So I'm trying to be cool. And I think, I can't fight. I can't yell and scream. I sure can't cry. I just got to take this like a man. So I looked the other way. She's wiping it with alcohol, and I'm waiting for that horrible feeling. But I relaxed. And she said, "There you go." I said, "What?" She said, "We're done." I said, "You already gave me the shot?" She said, "Yeah." I didn't feel it. When I stopped resisting, it didn't hurt. When I resisted, it was excruciatingly painful. Learn about the law of resistance. Jesus modeled it for us. He didn't resist, it ended quickly. The last thing we're going to look at today is the love of God. Chapter 27, verse 45. Now, from the 6th hour, there was darkness all over the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." If you read it, Mark, it's going to be a little bit different words. This is the Hebrew wording. Mark gives us the Aramaic wording. So he says, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is just the Aramaic. Same thing. My God, why have you forsaken me?" I grew up in church, and they said God had to turn his back on Jesus because he could have nothing to do with sin because he's holy. And I believed that all my life, but I didn't like it. I thought, how could a God of love do that to his son, Jesus? And as the years have gone by, I've thought about that a lot. And I've thought, with my New Age friends, some of them don't want to have anything to do with a God who would do that to his own son. That's cruel. They don't want to have anything to do with God. But I realized we have one God, 3 persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. I don't think the Father left. I don't think the Holy Spirit left. I think they were there the whole time. Jesus maybe could not feel them because he was covered with sin. Let's talk about what sin does. So many times we think sin is really just about keeping the rules. Romans 6:23 says, "The wages of sin are death." That word for death is thanatos. It literally means separation. Sin separates us from God. Let's go back to the garden. Now, God was in the garden with Adam and Eve, and they sinned. God didn't have to leave them because they were sinful people, because they were sin. In fact, he went looking for them. They hid from God. He didn't abandon them, they hid. That's human nature. When we're sinning, we have a natural tendency to hide from God. And you look at what happened to them, it still happens. Anytime we sin, we separate ourselves from God, from the people we love the most, and from the things we love the most. That's exactly what happened. They separated themselves from God because of their sin. They separated themselves from each other because of their sin. That good relationship, which was the eternal honeymoon in paradise that they blew for all the rest of us. And if they hadn't blown it, I would have blown it, I'm sure. But they blew it. And as soon as God was back on the scene and they were talking with God, Adam blames God and he blames the woman. There went that happy relationship. And then because God loved them, he took them out of the garden so they would no longer have access to the tree of life and live forever estranged from him. They needed to die because we look back to the cross. Those people before the cross were looking forward to it. Jesus was in the center of time, so those before looked forward. Those of us look back now. But Jesus came to save everybody. That was God's plan. So we look at what's going on. I just didn't like that I was always taught God abandoned him because he took on the sin of the world. I think the sin, because that's what sin does, it keeps us from feeling God. Haven't you all had those times in your life where you believe in God, you know he's real, you believe the Bible, but you can't feel him? And you've been praying and praying and praying and asking and asking and asking and begging and pleading and all that, and he still hasn't responded to you. So when things like that happen, sometimes we don't feel God's presence. But I want to go beyond that to something even better. You know how songs are. If I said, row, row, row your boat, you'd probably be thinking, come on now, you can do it gently down the stream. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Its fleece was. You know these songs. We started out with a song. I told you I was coming full circle with this in chapter 26. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. I have no idea what hymn they sung. But in biblical days, the book of Psalms was their hymnal. And Jesus had been learning these songs all of his life. They sang these songs at home, they sang these songs in synagogue, and he sings a song by David. It's extremely prophetic. You're going to hear David saying hundreds of years before Christ came, hundreds of years before the Romans had developed crucifixion, great detail of what Jesus' death was going to look like. So in Psalm 22, it says, to the choir master, according to the doe of the dawn. Now, I have no idea what the tune, the melody is for the doe of the dawn, but they knew back in those days. It was a tune, it was a melody. And these are the words, these are the lyrics to a song. Verse 1, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. Does this sound like something you might possibly sing on the cross? It sounds like a perfect biographical description of what Jesus was going through. I think Jesus was looking at the finish line. He'd been hanging on that cross. He had come. He had left the riches of heaven and became poor so that you could become rich. He's here. He's looking at the finish line. He knows he's near death. And when he dies, he knows he has become the final sacrifice, the offering for the sacrifice of all the sins, taking away the sin of the world and saving anybody who would believe in him. He's looking at the finish line. He's getting close. And maybe he starts to sing this song. My God, why have you forsaken me? There's more that he knew was involved with it. He says in verse 6, but I'm a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. In Matthew chapter 27, it said the people mocked him. They wagged their heads. Same words, wagged their heads at him. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. They said, hey, save yourself. Come down from the cross. All this is happening. Listen to the detail, the prophecy. This is hundreds of years before Jesus was on the cross. Verse 16, for dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among themselves, and from my clothing they cast lots. That's exactly what was happening. Verse 29, the end of the chapter. All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Posterity shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, that he has done it. I think he was staring at the finish line. He started to sing. I think God was with him the whole time. I think God was loving him. God was with Adam and Eve in their sin. God was with David all throughout his sin. When David got himself in sin with Bathsheba, he didn't feel the presence of God, but God heard every word he said. This happens. God doesn't leave us, we leave him. That's what sin does. It separates us from God. The last thing we're going to talk about is his great love that he laid down his life. So we're going to go back to that place where we started in the concentration camp. We've got Maximilian Kolbe, who gives up his life. He had a doctorate in philosophy, a doctorate in theology. He'd started churches. He'd been a missionary. He started churches all over the world. He'd started hospitals. He'd even started hospitals in Germany. And yet he died at 46 years old. He was able to lay down his life. How would that have happened? He had an experience when he was 12 years old. He was praying one day, and he had an experience with Mother Mary. And this is what she said to him. She came to me holding two crowns, one white and one red. She asked me if I was willing to accept either of these crowns. The white one meant that I should persevere in purity, and the red, that I should become a martyr. I said I would accept them both. Here's somebody at 12 years old realizes he's going to be a martyr. He was prepared. He was ready. He took it as it comes. For centuries, there's been a separation between the clergy and the laity. I think when Jesus ripped the veil, that changed. I think what you do is every bit as holy as what I do. Do you realize I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have people working at the grocery store selling me food? I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have a mechanic to keep my car running. I couldn't do what I do right now if I didn't have doctors, if I didn't have attorneys. There's a place in this world for everybody. It's Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. You get down to verse 14, and you will seek me and you will find me. When you seek me with all of your heart, I will be found by you. People like Father Kolbe just knew what God had called him to, and he thrived in it. This man that he gave his life for had always been a professional soldier. He stayed in concentration camp for nearly 6 years. When he got out, he got back with his family. He became a missionary, and he served God until he died at 93 years old. It's amazing how God puts all of these pieces together. He is for you. He's not against you. As we celebrate the cross, I hope you'll just consider how Jesus made it through the most difficult things a human can go through. And I want you to understand how important it was that he feel like he'd been abandoned by God. I don't think God abandoned him. He might have felt the words of that song, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? But he is a high priest, and he's been tempted in every way we can be tempted. And he understands you. He understands your frustration. He understands your disappointment. He understands your fear. He understands your struggles. He's been there. He has experienced it himself. So he welcomes you with love, with understanding. No matter what you've done, he's always there for you.